I'm a biographer with a special interest in women and war, where there is a rich seam of untold stories. But today I'm going to be asking the question, how the past, navigated through historical biography, can serve us to know who we are. So I'm going to start with the perhaps surprising statement that I don't think history is the past. I think history is our relationship with the past. So I was delighted when earlier this year Hilary Mantel, the Booker Prize-winning historical novelist, said something similar in her Wreath lecture. She said, "History is no more the past than a birth certificate is a birth, or a script is a performance, or a map is a journey." Well, I agree with that. I think that's beautiful. And I think that perhaps history books are bridges to the past. I write historical biography because I understand the world through people. The past isn't just something that happened out there. We, people, make it happen. And little takes you back more authentically through time than hearing the voices of people who didn't know what was going to happen next. So if history books are bridges to the past, I like to think that historical biographies are footbridges to the path, personal pathways to give us connections between past and present lives. And crossing that footbridge, you can look across to the past, but you travel back as a tourist, taking your baggage with you. And you cannot interact with the people who are there. Although sometimes, doing my research for my books, I have had cause to question that. When I was writing my second biography, it's about the life of Christina Skarbek, a Polish-born countess who became the first woman to work for Britain as a special agent in the Second World War. I was very lucky. I got to go to Poland to look in the archives, and I stayed in Warsaw in a beautiful apartment in the old town, right on the old square, belonging to the son of one of Christina's lovers. And he's a Polish count, and he said, "Stay in my lovely apartment." So I came down in the morning and opened the front door to go out and do my research, and I saw an entire Wehrmacht unit from the Second World War outside the front door. I just thought, well, yeah, that's not right. So I shut the door and I took a moment to calm myself, and then I opened up again, and unfortunately they were still there, and now they were quite annoyed as well. And this Nazi officer got off his motorbike and started running towards me. And he was shouting, and he had a handheld machine gun with a kind of perforated barrel at the end of it, and he started jabbing it towards my neck, at which point I was nearly in tears. It's pretty scary stuff. And then my friend Maciek, who had come to translate for me, came running around the corner. He said, "I am so sorry, Claire. I didn't realize. Last night when we arrived, it was dark. And I didn't see this poster tacked onto the side of the buildings. It says, 'Please don't come out of these flats between 8 and 10 in the morning, because we're filming for a World War II TV series.'" And I come out right in the middle of it and ruin their take, and that's why they were quite cross. So I suppose because I was a biographer and I was there yearning to make a connection, my imagination had leapt back into the past. And in fact, John le Carré, the spy novelist, has said the real bridge is imagination. But of course, I hadn't really travelled back through time, because as far as I'm aware, you can't do that. But I had made a real emotional connection. So if historical biographies are bridges to the past, or perhaps windows, I also think they are mirrors to the past. And they reflect the preoccupations and perceptions of the people trying to look through them. The British historian, Dr. David Starkey, rightly argued in 2009, "Our new world has its own set of prejudices, its set of distinct lenses, and we need to be aware of them." And I think that's absolutely right. But I wear glasses. Today I'm wearing contact lenses, and I know that if you're looking through a lens, it's actually very hard to see the glass. So Dr. Starkey continued to say, if you were to do a proper history of Europe before the last 5 minutes, it's a history of white males, because they were the power players, and to pretend anything else is to falsify. Well, this is where I disagree with Dr. Starkey, because I think a proper history is actually that whole rich tapestry of all the people that make up our past. I think that Dr. Starkey could only see other people's, other historians' perspectives. He couldn't see his own. So, of course, it is much harder to recognise your own perspectives and bias. If I look back at photographs of myself in the 1980s, I'm a punk. I thought I was pretty cool. I had long green hair, made my own skirts, sometimes walked out of them. And now I look back and I think, well, what was I wearing? What was I thinking? I feel I'm, much more confident today. I'm an adult. I make better choices. But of course, in a few years' time, I'll probably look back at the TED Talk video and think, yeah, but why did I choose to wear that to give my TED Talk? Because fashions change, and fashions change in the way that we look at the world as well. We've had Marxist perspectives and Christian perspectives. We've had several waves of feminist perspectives. And today, our views are informed by liberal ideologies or various different extremisms. In 2011, the then British Education Secretary, Michael Gove, said that history in schools ought to be taught to celebrate the distinguished role of these islands in the history of the world. Well, I think that's history as propaganda. If you like, he was trying to build a bridge forward through time to get his ideas solidified. And there is nothing new about this. Shakespeare was doing it when he was writing his historical plays in his day. But in these days, I think we need to be particularly wary when we have so much fake news, which can easily solidify into fake history. So we must be conscious of our and other people's perspectives, bias and prejudices. But lenses, if used carefully, can be very useful to bring new insights to our understanding of history as well. I'm a feminist. I have often noticed, writing about women and war, that women in the resistance or female special agents are often written about in rather romantic terms. They're described as beautiful and selfless, and a lot of attention is paid to their courage. Well, they were courageous, but they were also very competent. They were very effective, and this isn't emphasised as much. So, you can be ugly or plain and courageous. You can be female and effective. Christina Skarbek, who I mentioned before, wasn't just the first woman to work as a special agent for Britain in the war, she was also the longest serving. Among her many achievements, she secured the defection of an entire German garrison on a strategic pass in the Alps. She also saved the lives of many of her male colleagues. Now, Christina worked for an organisation called SOE, which stood for the Special Operations Executive. But she was so keen to serve that she volunteered early, and she signed up with an organisation called Section D before SOE was established. Now, the D in Section D stands for destruction, because they blew up a lot of bridges, and Christina was involved in a lot of sabotage. And it is very tempting here to take a leaf out of her book and think perhaps sometimes we need to destroy the old bridges, including the old narrative bridges, so that we can build better ones. But actually, I think the more bridges you have, the more perspectives, the better, because we can learn something from every one. That is why we regularly need new biographies of the same subjects, not just because we have new information, but because we can bring new perspectives to bear. So every generation needs their own Cleopatra, or Elizabeth I, or Violette Szabo. And every biography talks as much about the context in which it was written as it does about its subject. In some sense, then, I've often thought of biographies as being rather like fairy tales, which is not to diminish them or say they're childlike. And in fact, Albert Einstein said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. But biographies and fairy tales do share certain traits. A novelist, when they write the book, they act as God, if you like. They create this entire fictional world. And there is only one version of it, their version. Nothing else happens outside of it. But biographies, like fairy tales, are open to eternal retellings. Nobody owns that story. And I'm certainly very suspicious if I hear a biographer say, I've written the definitive biography of someone. I immediately think, well, no. But biographies are also the opposite of fairy tales. Fairy tales are about archetypes, the wicked witch, the evil stepmother, or the innocent child. And biographies are fundamentally about real people with nuanced, complex characters, not types. And in reading biographies, we seek not just the other that intrigues us, the female special agent, the Nazi female test pilot, but also the familiar that connects us. When recently I saw a film a friend had produced called Portrait of a Soldier, about the Warsaw Uprising and a female soldier in that battle called Wanda Tragic-Stawska. And I was interested to see this film because I wanted to know about that woman's motivations. I wanted to know about her inner resources, and I wanted to know about her actions and the achievements that made her such a heroine. But what really struck me in that film was a little moment when she was speaking. She said she was looking forward to getting given her code name because she'd always wanted to be called Atma, which in Polish means soul. But they looked at her, and she was quite short and slightly round, and they called her Paszek, which means donut. And immediately I felt a sense of connection with this woman. It really brought her story to life for me. So biographies can provide us with access to the past that can be at once different and recognizable, and often evolving. We cannot change the past, but we can engage with it. Recently, I saw an interview with a woman called Eva Moses Kor. She is a survivor from Auschwitz. She entered Auschwitz with her family, her identical twin sister Miriam and their parents, and Miriam and Eva were immediately separated from the others. They never saw their family again. They were taken away and they were subjected to medical experimentation by the Nazi so-called doctor, Joseph Mengele. He injected both those girls, they were 6 years old, with clear liquids. They never knew what they were, and both of the girls became incredibly ill. They were fortunate only in that the camp was liberated while they were still alive, and both those girls survived the war. Decades later, Eva was invited to take part in a television documentary about Auschwitz. And while she was there, she met another of the interviewees for this documentary. He was a former Nazi, and he had been a so-called doctor at Auschwitz. And how was she meant to respond to him? Well, she did something rather marvelous. She invited him to go back to Auschwitz with her, and there, 50 years after the liberation of the camp, she asked him to sign a witness statement saying what he had seen at the camp. And then she said she had it in black and white. And if she met a Holocaust denier, which she still does, incredibly, she could say, look, I've got it, a written statement. So I thought that was pretty powerful. But she went on from there. She said, for 50 years, she had felt that she was a victim. She had considered herself as being a victim in life. But now she found she had a power. She had the power to forgive. And so she wrote, just for herself personally, a letter to that doctor, so-called doctor. She wrote him a letter of personal forgiveness. She said, we cannot change what happened. That is the tragic part. But we can change how we relate to it. So, I think we need to be more honest about our very subjective relationship with the past. Historical biographies provide very personal footbridges back through time. And crossing these bridges, we can learn about the past and we can engage with history in new ways. Most bridges span fixed points, but historical biographies span time, so they're sort of built on shifting sands. And every history or biography, every text has a context in which it was written and a different one in which it is read and understood. History, then, our relationship with the past, is not static, it's not something over and done with, it's alive and ever-changing. And historical biography serves us not just showing us past lives, but in showing us how we look at the world, who we are today, and who we could be. Thank you very much.